time! With the emotional rollercoaster that was Season 2 of Pacific Rim the Black still traumatizing our psyches, let's run some hypotheticals. And the one at the forefront of my mind is what would have happened if Apex hadn't have died. Don't get me wrong, I love the way Season 2 played out in the end. As friend of the channel GMK 2011 mentioned, it was more geared toward emotional impact rather than action-based thrills. And the season might be all the stronger for it, but I was always interested to see more of Apex in action. I really wanted to see all that potential that we saw in Season 1 put into practice in a high-stakes scenario, one that had actual life and death ramifications, against an opponent that was either a match or was more than a match for him. So in my Apex Origin video that I'll link to below, I went over Apex pretty comprehensively, I feel. I discussed how the chance encounter between a battle-damaged drone Jaeger and this stuff, which I'm sure it was mentioned somewhere that this is some of the bioluminescent kaiju blood, which, as you probably know, has secondary uses as fuel and has other strange properties too. Created a unique being, a rogue anomaly that was stronger, faster, more agile than perhaps anything we had seen in this universe before. And even more important than all those attributes was the fact that this hybrid was a free-thinking creature, which means it's not only free of any allegiance in this war against the precursors, but can also think creatively and strategically. I mean, when I say thinking creatively, I don't mean like painting fucking Picassos and shit. I mean like, battle tactics. We saw in Season 2 that Boy sent out a psychic distress call to bring Apex to his rescue, but by the time he arrives, Boy was already under the control of the High Priestess of the Sisters of the Kaiju, so he attacked Apex. It's here that while trying to drift with Boy to restore his memories, that we see Apex flick Boy off as if he were a fly. And it's obvious that if Apex had wanted to, he could have killed Boy without even breaking a sweat, but he did not want to. He understood that Boy wasn't himself and held back, allowing his own body to be scratched and gouged and destroyed in the process. Fucking heartbreaking. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But losing Apex at this point meant that our final matchup in Season 2 was Category 6 Breacher versus Atlas Destroyer, which was a training Jaeger. And there was never any chance that this was going to be any kind of balanced fight. And you know what? I've made my peace with that. I'm cool with the way it went. But let's say that Apex didn't die, and in the middle of the absolute dismantlement of poor Atlas, who shows up but the Darth Maul of all kaiju, Apex. Boy is still out of action because of those PPDC drone Jaegers and their pesky missiles, and Atlas is down, hemorrhaging fluids and on backup power. And it comes down to Apex versus Breacher, one-on-one. And it's time to talk about the Breacher. Do you remember Gregor Clegane from Game of Thrones, the Mountain? This is Pacific Rim's equivalent. Now, not a lot is known about this guy, at least not at the time that I'm making this vid. It could be that more details come out further down the line, but for now, I'm just gonna piece together the scraps and throw in my own speculation. But my first question would be, is this guy a hybrid or not? In episode 2, Bunyip Man here mentions that hybrid kaiju mostly live in the Divide, the territory of the Sisters of the Kaiju. And it generally seems that in Season 2, hybrid kaiju are definitely more common than they once were. So does that make Breacher a hybrid? Does the fact that it's under the control of the Sisters and the High Priestess in itself make it some kind of hybrid, especially if it had to be pumped full of the Sisters' weird bioluminescent blood to bring it under their control? I don't know. I guess it's not the most pertinent of questions relevant to this situation, but it would be interesting to see if it was like hybrid versus hybrid in this fight, right? Regardless, Breacher is the first Category 6 kaiju that we've seen in this universe. We've had Slattern and Raiju as Cat 5s, and then of course the combined Mega Kaiju, whose category is never specified. So it's possible that Mega Kaiju is a Cat 6. I've even heard mentioned that because it's 2 Cat 4s and a Cat 5 all fudged together, that it might even be considered a Cat 13. But in any case, we don't really know. All we know is that this is the first officially recognized Category 6. Now, let's put Mega Kaiju aside for one second, because that was a fudged together, unholy abomination, which I find quite hard to place in terms of how powerful the thing actually is. Like, this thing could be 3 times as powerful as a Cat 5. I get the feeling by that stage, the writers of Uprising had just given up and things just got nonsensical. Whatever, just make it the most powerful thing ever! So I think that a better benchmark might be the Category 5s that we know, Slattern and Raijin. And if you get a good, clear mental picture of how powerful those guys were, it makes this category 6 pretty terrifying. Physically speaking, the most glaring feature of note here is that this thing only has 2 eyes, which makes it quite rare, right? Most kaiju have multiple. If you want to take an extreme case, Spine Jackal literally had eyes all over and in the back of its head, giving it 360 vision. Anyway, Breacher has fairly human-like teeth actually, with rounded incisors and for a kaiju, relatively modest canines, considering a lot of these guys have insanely sized teeth or tusks protruding out from everywhere. I'm surprised we haven't had a kaiju that isn't just a big ball of teeth. Oh my god, do not let the Uprising writers get a hold of that idea. Breacher's hide sometimes reminds me of Raijin's, with an inner hide which, although is not as soft and fleshy as Raijin's, does seem to be protected by a hardened outer shell which forms these forward-facing spikes. It's got a horn chin and spikes on its thick neck, and damn, when it stands upright like this, it looks fearsome as all fuck. It has a bladed tail and arms that look like they don't have any muscle, with just a radius and what's the other one called? An ulna? Let's check WebMD, let's check WebMD. You've got leukemia. With just a radius bone and an ulna bone connecting to a powerful clawed 3-fingered hand with a large forefinger and thumb that are easily large enough to wrap around Atlas's head. And I think that these huge, heavy, club-like hands might be the beast's most powerful weapon. I even noticed that it seemed to have like a spine-like bone formation on the front of its body. So could we be seeing the first twin-spined creature ever? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Extra support for all the jiggly bits, you know? Breacher has 2 small arms tucked into its abdomen that don't have any clear obvious use. I did wonder if they were for holding his smoothie so he can like be slurping away while he's flattening opponents. He also has these bony blades coming off at the elbow, which look like they could be pretty savage. But it's really the weight in those big giant hands that it can use to club and just flatten opponents that Apex would undoubtedly have to worry about. Now let's just compare these two in terms of size briefly. Of course, because these two never met in Season 2, we don't have a direct comparison, but Apex did meet Atlas, and you can get a pretty good feel for his size by comparing the two from this shot here. I've seen online that Atlas Destroyer is supposed to be about 250 foot tall, compared to Gypsy Avenger, which is about 268, or Gypsy Danger, which is about 260. But any which way you look at it, Atlas is dwarfed by the Breacher. So I see this battle being a tough one, a close fight for both contenders, but also a tough one to call. Neither of these guys are clear and obvious favorites, and honestly, it could go either way. I think if they did have this play out in an actual episode, the writers would probably include some external factor to give one party the advantage, like some ground that gives way, or one slips off of a cliff. But personally, I don't like doing that. I prefer to imagine these guys mano a mano. And I reckon it would be kind of like a ninja versus a freight train. The bipedal juggernaut is almost an unstoppable force when it's allowed to gather some speed and charge. But as we see here, it can be unbalanced when Atlas shoulder barges it. And as I said, it's a biped, so it won't have the stability of a 4-legged kaiju. It doesn't seem to have a particularly low center of gravity either, even given how sturdy its legs are and the extra balance provided by that tail. So I think that would be Apex's best shot of beating this guy, overbalancing it and bringing it down and capitalizing on how slow it would be to get back to its feet. But to do that, Apex would have to get in close, which means being within the range of those devastating mallet arms, which I think would absolutely crush Apex in only a few hits. The incident with Boy, which I don't particularly want to think about, showed that even the smaller Cat 2 kaiju can inflict horrific damage to Apex's hull, or skin, or whatever you want to call it. So just imagine what these sledgehammers could do. Of course, the incident with Boy only happened because Apex deliberately lowered its defenses and let Boy do his thing. Wouldn't happen here, but I think that Apex would be relying on its agility to dodge the attacks rather than block them, because I think that even blocking these blows is gonna hurt a lot. So Apex can use his speed to outmaneuver and get in close, but even then, when he does, will his claws that are admittedly razor sharp be able to pierce this shit? And here, I'm saying no. I don't think that those claws pierce that. Definitely not the hardened outer shell, but I've got a feeling probably not the inner part either. And even if it is a soft underbelly in there, I don't think even several blows from his claws inflicts enough damage on this thing before it takes one of those massive hits. And at this stage, I reckon the fight would turn in Breacher's favor, and Breacher would start beating down on Apex, cracking and eventually breaking into his hull. And oh my god, I'm getting flashbacks, until Apex is just a limp and bleeding mass on the ground. It tries to clamber up to its feet when Breacher's tail whips around, its sharp point about to go in for the killing blow. And yeah, I know I've got a little bit carried away and this is turning into fan fiction, but do you think I'm gonna let Breacher win? This is my channel. Fuck you. Apex gathers all that remains of his strength. He pivots, he leaps towards Breacher before gripping a hold of his head and latching on as tight as he can with his dying strength before establishing eye contact and therefore adrift. The tail stabs through Apex's chest, piercing through to the other side, but Apex don't give no fucks. He's committed. There's no way he's letting go until this motherfucker is dead. And just like in The Crow, remember that one where Brandon Lee gives the bad guy, what is it, like 90 hours of pain all at once? Well, that! And Apex summons all of the imagery of the horrors it witnessed in the Uprising War and all of the horrific things it's seen in the black and puts it in Breacher's mind, forcing it to recoil, clawing its own face off to try and distract it from the psychological torment with the sweet sting of physical pain. Anything to avoid those psychological horrors. It claws at its own throat, ripping out its own windpipe before drowning in its own blood. It falls to the ground. Apex 2. And they both die. Apex taking the win by the absolute narrowest of margins. Ah, f*** it, I'm an Apex fan. F*** it, I do what I want. So that's how my little Apex fanboy wet dream plays out. But I think that in many other scenarios, Breacher takes this. He's bigger, he's bulkier, he is built like a tank. Of course, let's not forget that Apex has a really powerful punch as well, as we see here. But how many times is he going to be able to do this before Breacher gets in one of his blows? And if Boy's attack showed us anything, is that this would do a huge amount of damage to Apex. So I think that given Apex's speed, his agility, and his ferociousness, there are circumstances where he can win this. But it would be an uphill struggle for him, and most of the time, the win would go to Breacher. So guys, it's a really tough one to call, so I'm really eager to hear what you guys think. Don't get butthurt if my opinion doesn't match up with yours. It's fine, everybody has their own opinions. Feel free to get in the comments and explain why you feel the way you do. But no matter what your thoughts are on this, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that this guy was taken from us all too soon. Plenty more cool stuff in the pipeline, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try and keep these videos coming thick and fast as long as I can. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon for the next one. Cheerio, bye! I said that weird.